Hi, I'm Robert Orm, and I'll be reading you today's edition of the Fall River Herald, dated Monday, July 21st, 2025. How powerful this is. Local donations reach survivors of deadly blaze. By Emily Shirt. Heaps of gently used clothing towered over the heads of a handful of volunteers who fanned themselves in the sweltering chapel of Catholic Charities Diocese of Fall River at 1600 Bay Street. Boxed food piled up around the corner. Blankets and hygiene products could be seen in individually marked parcels that lined the hallway, destined to be hand-delivered to survivors of the Gabriel House assisted living fire. We have seen the greatness of this tragedy bring out extreme compassion, the good at the heart of people, Chief Executive Officer of Catholic Charities, Susan Mazzarella said. An elderly woman greeted Mazzarella at the door on July 16th with her late husband's clothing, intent on donating some of the first goods that will launch a days-long operation of delivering donations received by Catholic Charities to survivors in need. Later that day, Mazzarella recalled, a woman and her young son brought more items to add to the growing mound, and at the same time shared that the child's uncle was a first responder on scene at the fire. Mazzarella said the July 17th delivery effort was slated to start at 10 a.m., but due to some of the victims' placements changing, or the fact that many of them, she said, had no remaining family to retrieve their packages, drivers were heading out with parcels around noon. Scott Gifford, the facilities director, pointed out 9 unknown parcels ready to be delivered during a second round of donation deliveries planned later in the week. Once the whereabouts of the recipient was identified by Sheila Chase, the Director of Housing and Basic Needs for the organization. Rosemary Saraiva, Volunteer Coordinator, said they have a good contingency of volunteers folding, sorting, and bagging the appropriate sizes and care items needed for survivors. Mazzarella said she is stunned at the outpouring and explained that people come in who we don't know to offer help. Meanwhile, Catholic Charities Board of Directors Vice Chairwoman Kathleen Sylvia was also found aiding the operation. Sylvia, who has worked as a nursing home administrator for 22 years, expressed her compassion for the overwhelming powerlessness likely felt by survivors who may have been immobile and unable to evacuate unassisted. I can't even tell you how powerful this is, Mazzarella said, adding that in her 8 years at the helm, she has not seen a cause similar in magnitude to this one. Before it housed the Fall River Diocese's Catholic Charities, the building that rests on 9 acres was the Rose Hawthorne Lathrop Cancer Treatment Center and Assisted Living Facility since 1932. And at the turn of the 20th century, even further back in history, it served as a tuberculosis ward, Mazzarella said. According to her own research, she claimed 9,600 patients died over the decades that the building was used for healthcare purposes, but that no one passed alone, she said, as nuns attended each death. Think about how many prayers went up for people in that chapel, she mused. The building is still ministering, according to its lifetime mission, she concluded. While volunteers sped back and forth in the hall carrying parcels to waiting vehicles, in a side room, Mazzarella held a bundle of handmade cards tied with a bow to her chest. The cards are from residents of the Franklin Court Assisted Living Facility in Bristol, Rhode Island. In 2023, a fire broke out there also, but all residents managed to escape or be rescued. Words of support and encouragement, and drawings, filled the pages of the cards shared from one survivor to another. This is, said Mazzarella, searching for words, an act of community. Residents' documents conflict on fire drills, by Dan Medeiros. Residents who were evacuated from Gabriel House assisted living facility after the deadly July 13th fire did not paint a pretty picture of the building. The city on July 16th and 17th released building and fire department reports for the last several years. Despite residents' concerns, the documents show a facility that, though occasionally hit with bedbug and roach problems, was up to code and passed all fire safety inspections the last 6 years running, including holding fire drills, which some residents have claimed did not occur. Fire Chief Jeffrey Bacon said in a press conference Thursday that proof those drills occurred were on the honor system. At such facilities, fire drills are performed by the staff and recorded in a log. When performing fire inspections, inspectors record the date the most recent fire drill was conducted based on the staff's say-so, and check that its log is up to date. Several residents of Gabriel House who have spoken to the media don't remember those drills. One resident, Donna Murphy, said in her 5 years there was never a fire drill, not once. Bacon said there's a good reason for that. The fire drills aren't for residents. Bacon, whom performed nursing home inspections for a decade earlier in his career, said in the event of a fire in a hospital, nursing home, or assisted living facility, residents will not be able to help themselves. Fire drills will not resemble school fire drills where everyone evacuates. The fire drills at the nursing homes, we have them for the staff. At the hospitals, the fire drills are for the staff. They're not evacuating the hospitals, Bacon said. That residents never experienced a fire drill is not at all unusual, he said. The patients don't know that fire drills are happening, so I'm not surprised that in this case some of the residents weren't aware of it, he said. The staff is aware of what their responsibilities are in the event of a fire. It's not for the patients or the residents. On Wednesday, Bacon said nursing homes and hospitals are required to perform 2 fire drills per shift per quarter, but that he could not confirm that assisted living facilities follow the same rule. The city supplied fire inspection reports from Gabriel House from 2019 to 2024. In those years, the fire inspection forms noted that fire drills were conducted and Gabriel House's log was up to date, except 2021, when those lines were left blank. It's not known in what form Gabriel House's fire drill log was kept. Bacon said the goal of a fire inspection is to ensure compliance with safety standards. They rely on licensed professionals to do their inspections. We're just following up to make sure those are done. Fire officials also do a walkthrough to locate any visible safety hazards and check that sprinkler systems are on and properly pressurized. What else do the city's inspection reports reveal? The city issued building inspection certificates consistently to Gabriel House since it was converted to an assisted living facility in 1996. The number of rooms grew since it was first converted. The first floor contained 14 rooms on the first floor in 2002. That grew to 29 rooms in 2024. The second floor added 3 more rooms since the conversion, from 27 to 30. The third floor added 9 more rooms, from 33 rooms to 42 rooms. Residents of Gabriel House filed pest control complaints with the city's Department of Inspectional Services in 2014, 2015, 2019, 2020, and 2024. Apartments in the facility were treated for pests including bedbugs, roaches, and mice. Police video shows officers saving lives, by Dan Medeiros. Police on Thursday released a brief glimpse of body-worn camera footage from officers who responded to the Gabriel House fire on the night of July 13th. The fire broke out shortly after 9:30 p.m. at the Oliver Street Assisted Living Facility, where about 70 people were trapped, most of them elderly, disabled, and immobile. Among the first public safety officials to respond were 13 members of the Fall River Police Department, 11 officers and 2 sergeants. The officers kicked in doors and knocked them in with fire axes, alongside members of the Fall River Fire Department, entering the smoke-filled building to evacuate often confused and helpless residents. While it's generally frowned upon for officers to interfere in a fire scene, Police Chief Kelly Furtado said her people could not stand by. It goes against any public servant's nature to stand there and listen to people cry for help, said Furtado. It's in your DNA to chip in and help and do whatever you need to do. Police officers are shown helping several residents escape the building, leading them downstairs and ramps to safety across Oliver Street while fire alarms blare. The footage, approximately 5 minutes of assembled clips, shows officers carrying people downstairs, diving into a small bathroom window to check for anyone trapped, and shouting out residents, "We need you out! Big fire!" The first video is from 9:45 p.m. and the clip goes through 10:35 p.m. With one resident strapped to a rescue toboggan, an officer tells the resident, "It'll be like old days at Kennedy Park, my man." It also shows an officer bent over and retching after having inhaled too much smoke. Furtado said 4 of those officers were treated for smoke inhalation and have since returned to duty. They received peer support early that morning, around 3:30 or 4 a.m. Watching the footage made her teary-eyed, Furtado said. "I was so incredibly proud of those officers. Mind you, some of these kids are 23, 24 years old, and even though they've been a police officer for a short time, they've never experienced anything like this, or remotely close," she said. The Gabriel House fire is the deadliest fire statewide in 41 years, and the deadliest fire in Fall River in over 150 years. Fire Chief Jeffrey Bacon said Thursday that he reached out to those officers on the night of the fire to commend them. "That's not their job. That's not their comfort zone," he said. For them to be able to recognize that, to go in, to take the smoke they did, and to save people, that was absolutely amazing. Furtado said the effort didn't end with the rescues. When police put out a call for other officers to respond to the fire scene, Furtado said, others arrived to provide support, food, and water. "They really took care of each other," she said. "It was a proud moment for me." Trump wants justices to strike down gun rules, by Maureen Gropp. After the Supreme Court in 2022 made it harder to restrict who can arm themselves in public, some states took a different approach. 5 Democrat-led, mostly densely populated states passed laws that prohibit bringing a handgun onto someone else's property without that person's express consent. Now the Trump administration wants the Supreme Court to declare that such rules in Hawaii, California, New York, Maryland, and New Jersey violate the Constitution. The United States has a substantial interest in the preservation of the right to keep and bear arms and in the proper interpretation of the Second Amendment, Solicitor General John Sauer wrote in explaining why the Justice Department wants the High Court to weigh in. That's not the only example of how the change in administrations is affecting litigation over gun regulations. In a move alarming to groups working to prevent gun violence, the DOJ declined to continue to defend a federal law setting 21 as the minimum age to own a handgun after an appeals court ruled the restriction unconstitutional. For a government to step back and say, hey, here's a major piece of firearms legislation that was passed by Congress. We're just not going to bother to defend it any longer. That's a really, really significant thing, said Esther Sanchez Gomez, executive director for the Giffords Law Center, a gun safety group. The DOJ has also told the Supreme Court that the federal government no longer opposes all aspects of a Missouri law blocked by lower courts after the Biden administration and others challenged it, that would penalize state police for enforcing federal gun control laws. This is the first time we've seen a Justice Department really actively fight for the Second Amendment rights of all Americans, said Hannah Hill, vice president of the National Foundation for Gun Rights. Hill said it's taken the administration longer than she'd hoped to take a stand, and her group is eager for President Donald Trump to repeal federal regulations, including rules on untraceable ghost guns that the Supreme Court upheld in March. At a 2024 campaign stop to address thousands of members of the National Rifle Association in Pennsylvania, Trump promised that no one will lay a finger on your firearms if voters put him back in the White House. Your Second Amendment will always be safe with me as your president. Soon after taking office, Trump signed an executive order directing a review of Biden-era firearm policies and of the positions the government has taken in gun-related litigation. Legal challenges to firearm rules spiked after the court created a new test for gun laws in its 2022 decision, striking down a New York law that required state residents to have proper cause to carry a handgun. The court said gun rules must be similar to a historical regulation on weapons to pass constitutional muster. As the administration was changing hands in January, the New Orleans-based Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeal said a decades-old federal law banning handgun purchases by 18 to 20-year-olds fails that test. The history of firearm use, particularly in connection with militia service, contradicts the premise that 18 to 20-year-olds are not covered by the plain text of the Second Amendment, U.S. Circuit Judge Edith Jones wrote for the court. In July, the DOJ told a lower court that the government is not going to appeal that decision to the Supreme Court, but the High Court may still take up the issue. In June, the Richmond-based Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals reached the opposite conclusion as the Fifth Circuit, ruling against a similar challenge. From English common law to America's founding and beyond, our regulatory tradition has permitted restrictions on the sales of firearms to individuals under the age of 21. U.S. Circuit Judge J. Harvey Wilkinson III wrote for the court. The four 18 to 20-year-olds challenging the age restriction have appealed that decision to the Supreme Court. The DOJ has not yet filed its response. In its brief supporting a challenge to Hawaii's new law prohibiting the carrying of handguns onto someone else's property without their consent, the government said the rule effectively nullifies the general right to carry a gun in public that the court upheld in 2022. Someone carrying a firearm for self-defense cannot run errands without fear of criminal sanctions, Sauer told the court. Sanchez Gomez, the litigation director for the Giffords Law Center, said property owners have always had the ability to restrict weapons. But Hawaii's law makes the default that handguns aren't allowed unless there's express permission, rather than that they are allowed unless they're expressly prohibited. When the court limited states' control over who could publicly carry guns, she said, the focus turned to where in public they could bring them. Alex McCord, an assistant professor with the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions, said the Supreme Court could take up the case not so much because the Trump administration wants it to, but because one appeals court upheld Hawaii's rule while a different appeals court rejected New York's. The fact that we have these differing opinions across the country probably weighs even heavier in the Supreme Court's mind, he said. Still, McCourt said, it's relatively rare for the High Court to weigh in on gun laws. They often say no, he said. In June, the justices declined to hear a challenge to Maryland's ban on assault-style weapons, though Justice Brett Kavanaugh said he expects his colleagues will address the AR-15 issue soon, in the next term or two. Days later, the Justice Department urged the Chicago-based 7th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals to strike down a similar law in Illinois. Because the act is a total ban on a category of firearms that are in common use by law-abiding citizens for lawful reasons, it is flatly unconstitutional, lawyers for the DOJ wrote in a legal brief supporting the challenge. The Firearms Policy Coalition, one of the groups fighting Illinois' law, called the DOJ's filing a critical step toward Trump fulfilling his promise to defend the Second Amendment. We hope Solicitor General Sauer will stand with us on this issue at the Supreme Court when this case inevitably heads up, Coalition President Brandon Coombs said in a statement. Nobel Laureates Warn of Nuclear Dangers by Davis Wenke. In the fall of 2022, U.S. spies said the chances of Russia using tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine were 50%, a coin flip. Nearly 3 years later, the risk of nuclear war has only increased, top experts say. The bulletin of the atomic scientist's famed doomsday clock is the closest it has ever been to midnight. Humanity is heading in the wrong direction on the one threat that could end civilization in an afternoon, warned an assembly of Nobel laureates, nuclear experts, and diplomats who gathered at the University of Chicago to mark the 80th anniversary of the planet's first nuclear explosion in 1945, when the United States conducted the Trinity test in New Mexico. Although Russia hasn't nuked its neighbor, the brutal war of attrition continues in Ukraine. Two nuclear-armed countries, India and Pakistan, attacked each other in May. The United States and Israel, which both have nuclear weapons, bombed Iran in June to destroy its nuclear program. Popular support for building nuclear weapons grows in countries like Japan and South Korea. Against this backdrop, more than a dozen Nobel Prize winners and numerous nuclear experts signed a Declaration for the Prevention of Nuclear War last week with recommendations for world leaders to reduce the increasing risk of nuclear conflict. Despite having avoided nuclear catastrophes in the past, time and the law of probability are not on our side, the declaration says. Without clear and sustained efforts from world leaders to prevent nuclear war, there can be no doubt that our luck will finally run out. The declaration emerged from days of discussion and debate, said Assembly Leader David Gross, a University of California, Santa Barbara physicist and 2004 Nobel Prize winner. We are calling on our leaders in the world to consider our suggestions and heed our warnings, Gross said. Longtime Vatican diplomat and nuclear advisor Cardinal Silvano Maria Tomasi argued that faith leaders should embrace a role in providing world leaders with independent moral and ethical assessments of nuclear policy and technology. The Declaration and speakers at its unveiling spoke extensively of the crucial role diplomacy and treaties played in building trust between countries with nuclear weapons and shrinking their arsenals after the Cold War. But a key treaty remains unenforced, and the last remaining arms control agreement between the United States and Russia expires in February 2026. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty is a 1996 international agreement that aims to ban explosive nuclear tests. Although the CTBT organization, headquartered in Vienna, successfully detects even underground nuclear tests and identifies when suspicious seismic events aren't test explosions, the treaty is not in force. 9 more countries, including the United States and Russia, which repealed its ratification of the CTBT in 2023, must formally approve the treaty before it becomes binding international law. At the Assembly, CTBT organization leader and former Australian diplomat Robert Floyd joined the Nobel winners in calling for the international community to formally approve the testing ban. Floyd argued that if countries with nuclear weapons resumed testing to build more destructive nukes, it could lead other states to develop nuclear weapons and a renewed global nuclear arms race. The declaration also highlighted the need for the United States, Russia, and China to enter arms control discussions. The 2010 new START treaty, which limits American and Russian nuclear weapons deployments and enables the rivals to verify the other's cooperation, expires in February 2026. Artificial intelligence and its role in nuclear weapons matters also weighed heavily. The declaration emphasized the unprecedented and serious risks posed by artificial intelligence and implored all nuclear-armed states to ensure meaningful and enhanced human control and oversight over nuclear command and control. Tomasi, the Vatican's representative, said scientists, disarmament experts, and faith leaders need to study the ethical implications of emerging technologies, such as AI, on nuclear stability. World leaders, including former President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping, generally agree that humans, and not AI algorithms, should control nuclear launch buttons. But debate rages over the ideal and safe extent of integrating AI into other nuclear functions such as early warning, targeting, and communications. A February report from the Center for a New American Security think tank on AI nuclear risk warned that over-reliance on untested, unreliable, or biased AI systems for decision support during a crisis could potentially lead decision makers on an escalating path during a nuclear crisis. Ultimately, argued Nobel laureate Gross, progress in reducing the risks of nuclear weapons hinges on popular pressure on world leaders. The main motivation for the advances in reducing the risk of Armageddon was the fear of many people throughout the world who demanded action from their leaders, Gross said. We've reached the halfway point of our program, and regular listeners are aware that at this stage of our broadcast, we move to the obituaries. Angelique Dawn Helker, 43, passed away on June 29, 2025, in Fall River, Massachusetts. Born on December 24, 1981, Angel was the daughter of the late Kathleen M. Helger and Robert Mercier. She lived most of her life in Tiverton, Rhode Island. Besides her daughter, survivors include brother Justin K. Mercier and his wife Jana, and sister Alyssa Mercier. She was the sister of the late Melissa S. Helger. The family will be contacting friends and family about the memorial service. Medics. More aid seekers killed in Gaza. At least 67 people were killed by Israeli fire while they waited for UN aid trucks in the northern Gaza Strip on July 20th, the territory's health ministry said, as Israel issued new evacuation orders for areas packed with displaced Gazans, some of whom began to leave. The ministry said dozens of people were also wounded in the incident in northern Gaza, in one of the highest reported tolls among repeated recent cases in which aid seekers have been killed, including 36 on July 19th. 6 other people were killed near another aid site in the south, it said. The Israeli military said its troops had fired warning shots toward a crowd of thousands in northern Gaza on July 20th to remove what it said was an immediate threat. It said initial findings suggested reported casualty figures were inflated, and it certainly does not intentionally target humanitarian aid trucks. It did not immediately comment on the incident in the south. In total, health authorities said 88 people had been killed by Israeli gunfire and airstrikes across Gaza on July 20th. After Israel's military dropped leaflets urging people to evacuate from neighborhoods in central Gaza's Deir al-Balah, residents said Israeli planes struck 3 houses in the area. Dozens of families began leaving their homes, carrying some of their belongings. Hundreds of thousands of displaced Gazans have been sheltering in the Deir al-Balah area. Israel's military said it had not entered the district subject to the evacuation order during the current conflict, and that it was continuing to operate with great force to destroy the enemy's capabilities and terrorist infrastructure in the area. Israeli sources have said the army has so far stayed out because it suspects Hamas might be holding hostages there. At least 20 of the remaining 50 hostages in captivity in Gaza are believed to still be alive. Hostage families demanded an explanation from the army. Can anyone promise to us that this decision will not come at the cost of losing our loved ones? The families said in a statement. Much of Gaza has been reduced to a wasteland during more than 21 months of war, and there are fears of accelerating starvation. Palestinian health officials said hundreds of people could die as hospitals were inundated with patients suffering from dizziness and exhaustion due to the scarcity of food and a collapse in aid deliveries. We warn that hundreds of people whose bodies have wasted away are at risk of imminent death due to hunger, said the health ministry, which is controlled by Hamas. The United Nations also said on July 20th that civilians were starving and needed an urgent influx of aid. Residents said it was becoming impossible to find essential food such as flour. The Gaza Health Ministry said at least 71 children had died of malnutrition during the war, and 60,000 others were suffering from symptoms of malnutrition. Later, July 20th, it said 18 people have died of hunger in the past 24 hours. Food prices have increased well beyond what most of the population of more than 2 million can afford. Several people who spoke to Reuters via chat apps said they either had one meal or no meal in the past 24 hours. As a father, I wake up in the early morning to look for food, for even a loaf of bread for my 5 children, but all in vain, said Ziad, a nurse. People who didn't die of bombs will die of hunger. We want an end to this war now, a truce, even for 2 months. Others said they felt dizzy walking in the streets, and that many fainted as they walked. Fathers leave tents to avoid questions by their children about what to eat. UNRWA, the UN refugee agency dedicated to Palestinians, demanded Israel allow more aid trucks into Gaza, saying it had enough food for the entire population for over 3 months that was not allowed in. Israel's military said that it views the transfer of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip as a matter of utmost importance, and works to enable and facilitate its entry in coordination with the international community. Some Palestinians suggested the move on Deir al-Balah might be an attempt to put pressure on Hamas to make more concessions in long-running ceasefire negotiations. Israel and Hamas are engaged in direct talks in Doha aimed at reaching a 60-day truce and hostage deal, although there has been no sign of breakthrough. Residents reported calm in Syria's Swaida on July 20th after the Islamist-led government announced that Bedouin fighters had withdrawn from the predominantly Druze city, and the United States stepped up calls for an end to days of fighting. With hundreds reported killed, the Swaida bloodshed is a major test for interim President Ahmed al-Shara, prompting Israel to launch airstrikes against government forces last week as it declared support for the Druze. Fighting continued on July 19th despite a ceasefire call. Interior Minister Anas Khattab said on July 20th that internal security forces had managed to calm the situation and enforce the ceasefire, paving the way for a prisoner exchange and the gradual return of stability throughout the governorate. Reuters images showed Interior Ministry forces near the city, blocking the road in front of members of tribes congregated there. The Interior Ministry said late July 19th that Bedouin fighters had left the city. The Syrian state news agency said an aid convoy sent to the city by the government was refused entry, while aid organized by the Syrian Red Crescent was let in. A source familiar with the situation said local factions in Swaida had turned back the government convoy. Kiev coping with Russia's nighttime attacks. By Yuri Kovalenko, Anastasia Malenko, and Vladislav Smilyans. Several nights a week, Daria Slavitska packs a yoga mat, blankets, and food into a stroller and descends with her 2-year-old Emil into the Kiev subway. While air raid sirens wail above, the 27-year-old tries to snatch a few hours' sleep safely below ground. For the past 2 months, Russia has unleashed nighttime drone and missile assaults on Kiev in a summer offensive that is straining the city's air defenses and has its 3.7 million residents exhausted and on edge. Other towns and villages have seen far worse since Russia launched its full-scale invasion in early 2022, especially those close to the front line far to the east and south. Many have been damaged or occupied as Russia advances, and thousands of people have fled to the capital, considered the best defended city in the country. But recent heavy attacks are beginning to change the mood. At night, residents rush to subway stations deep underground in scenes reminiscent of the German Blitz bombings of London during World War II. Slavitska has started nervously checking telegram channels at home even before the city's alarms sound, after she found herself in early July running into the street to reach the metro with explosions already booming in the sky. The number of people like Slavitska taking refuge in the cavernous Soviet-era ticket halls and drafty platforms of Kiev's 46 underground stations soared after large-scale bombardment slammed the city 5 times in June. Previously, the loud air raid alert on her phone sent Emil into bouts of shaking, and he would cry, "Corridor, corridor, Mum, I'm scared. Corridor, Mum," Slavitska said. Now, accustomed to the attacks, he says more calmly, "Mum, we should go." "We used to come here less often, about once a month," Slavitska said, sheltering in the Adamentyshenko station in western Kiev. "That was 6 months ago. Now we come 2 or 3 times a week." She spent the night curled up on her pink mat with Emil by a column lining the subway tracks. The subway system recorded 165,000 visits during June nights, more than double the 65,000 visits in May, and nearly 5 times the number in June last year, its press service told Reuters. More people were heading to the shelter because of the scale and lethality of attacks, the head of Kiev's military administration, Timur Tkachenko, told Reuters. He said strikes killed 78 Kiev residents and injured more than 400 in the first half of the year. President Donald Trump cited Russia's strikes on Ukrainian cities when announcing his decision on July 14th to offer Kiev more weapons, including Patriot missiles, to boost its air defenses. It's incredible that people stay, knowing that a missile could be hitting your apartment, Trump said. Russia launched more than 30 missiles and 300 drones during an overnight assault on July 19th that affected 10 regions of Ukraine, President Vladimir Zelensky said, including a mass drone attack on the Black Sea port city of Odessa. In April, a strike in Kiev destroyed a residential building a couple of miles from Slavitska's apartment block. It was so loud. Even my son woke up and I held him in my arms in the corridor, she said. It was really scary. With the threat of losing her home suddenly more tangible, she now takes her identity documents with her underground. After seeing how stressed Emil became after the air alerts, Slavitska sought help from a pediatrician, who recommended she turn off her phone's loud notifications and prescribed a calming medication. Slavitska tells Emil the loud sound during attacks is thunder. Scientists and psychologists say that the lack of sleep is taking its toll on a population worn down by more than 3 years of war. Katerina Holzber, a family psychologist who practices in Kiev, said sleep deprivation caused by the attacks was causing mood swings, extreme stress, and apathy, leading to declined cognitive functions in both kids and adults. Many people say that if you sleep poorly, your life will turn into hell and your health will suffer, said Katerina Storozhuk, another Kiev region resident. I didn't understand this until it happened to me. Anton Kurapov, a postdoctoral scholar at the University of Salzburg's Laboratory for Sleep, Cognition, and Consciousness Research, said it was hard to convey to outsiders what it felt like to be under attack. Imagine a situation where you go out into the street and a person is shot in front of you, and what fear you experience. Your heart sinks, he said. People experience this every day, this feeling. Kurapov warned that the impact of such stress could result in lifetime consequences, including chronic illnesses. A study he led that was published in the European Journal of Psychotraumatology in August 2024 showed that 88% of Ukrainians surveyed reported bad or very bad sleep quality. Lack of sleep can significantly impact economic performance and soldiers' ability to fight, said Wendy Troxell, senior behavioral scientist at RAND Corps, a U.S. think tank. RAND research in 2016, which Troxell co-wrote, showed that lack of sleep among the U.S. working population was costing the economy up to $411 billion a year. As she tries to squeeze out more hours of sleep in the subway, Slavitska is looking into buying a mattress to bring underground that would be more comfortable than her mat. Danish retailer JYSK says the airstrikes prompted a 25% jump in sales of inflatable mattresses, camp beds, and sleep mats in Kiev in 3 weeks of June. Others are taking more extreme measures. Small business owner Storozhuk, who had no shelter within 3 kilometers of her home, invested over $2,000 earlier this year in a Ukrainian-made capsule of life reinforced steel box, capable of withstanding falling concrete slabs. She climbs in nightly with her chihuahua Zozulia. I developed a lot of anxiety and fear, Storozhuk said. I realized that in order to be able to sleep peacefully in Ukraine, I needed some kind of safe shelter. CBO, health research cuts will mean fewer new drugs. By Ahmed Adulian. President Donald Trump's proposed budget cuts to the National Institutes of Health would eventually result in fewer drugs on the market, the Congressional Budget Office said on July 18th. The Trump administration's 2026 budget proposal includes deep cuts for scientific research, including $18 billion in cuts from the NIH's funding, a 40% reduction. In a letter responding to a request from congressional Democrats, CBO Director Philip Swagel said the nonpartisan agency estimates a hypothetical 10% cut in the NIH's funding of preclinical research that would reduce the number of drug candidates for Phase 1 clinical trials over 30 years, starting with 1 fewer drug in the first decade, 9 in the second, and 20 in the third. CBO estimated that a reduction in the NIH's funding of external preclinical research would ultimately decrease the number of new drugs coming to market by roughly 4.5%, or about 2 drugs per year, the letter said. Preclinical research is the earliest stage of drug development, so the effects of funding cuts take longer to kick in. The CBO expects cuts to clinical trials in which drugs are further along in development to also reduce the number of new drugs and to take effect sooner, but did not provide an analysis. Congressional Democrats had also asked the CBO to analyze the implications of reducing NIH funding by 35 to 38%. But the office said it had not determined whether historical data could reliably be used to do so. The CBO said it was updating its drug development model to address congressional interest in additional budget scenarios. Democrats also asked the CBO to analyze the effects of a 9-month increase in Food and Drug Administration review times of new drug applications. The Trump administration has carried out mass layoffs at the agency, initially firing 3,500 employees, though some have since been rehired. The CBO found such a delay would lead to 3 fewer drugs entering the market in the first decade, and 10 fewer in both the second and third decades. Delays in reviews would probably affect drug development in additional ways that the CBO did not assess, the office said. The Trump administration is proposing a $6.8 billion budget request for the FDA in 2026, representing a cut of around 5.5% from this year. Strength in numbers. 2 SEC teams are capable of rattling the College Football Playoff Committee. By Blake Topmeyer. Billy Napier chuckled when I asked about Florida's schedule. What else could the Gators coach do but laugh? Florida's gauntlet in 2025 projects to be among the nation's toughest, while its 4th-year football coach tries to stay off the hot seat. I don't have control over the schedule, Napier said in May as we chatted during the SEC's spring meetings. It's hard to imagine any coach asking for a schedule like the one Napier's Gators will play. Florida will face 7 teams expected to be ranked in the preseason USLBM coaches poll. With non-conference games against Miami and Florida State in the mix, the Gators are one of 3 SEC teams that will play 10 games against Power 4 competition. Big picture-wise, it can be an advantage or a disadvantage based off how the College Football Playoff Committee makes its at-large selections, he said. Oklahoma's Brent Venables can relate. His Sooners will face 7, maybe even 8 teams likely to be ranked in the preseason top 25. Florida and Oklahoma serve as the backbone of the SEC's quest for this CFP committee to more heavily weigh strength of schedule when making at-large selections. The SEC continued its strength of schedule drumbeat this week during its media days. The SEC positioned 3 9-3 teams for playoff consideration last season based on schedule strength, but neither Alabama, Ole Miss, nor South Carolina earned selection. On paper, at least, Florida and Oklahoma will endure a more intense gauntlet than those 9-3 SEC teams navigated in 2024. A 9-3 team from the SEC qualifying for the playoff would vindicate the conference's relentless messaging campaign touting its strength of schedule, and as it implores the committee to more heavily weigh those metrics. In truth, the committee traditionally values the SEC's strength of schedule, but Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina each presented resumes that were too flawed a year ago. Also, it became difficult to distinguish which of those 3 9-3 teams most deserved playoff consideration. The committee opted for none of them. I thought the committee erred by awarding the final at-large bid to SMU, which lacked a signature victory despite its 11-2 record, but I didn't interpret the committee's choice as a rule that it would never take a 3-loss SEC team instead of a 1 or 2-loss team from another conference. Florida and Oklahoma, with their capable lineups but daunting schedules, are candidates to become the playoffs' first 9-3 qualifier. Each touts one of the nation's most talented quarterbacks in Florida's DJ Lagway and Oklahoma's John Mateer, a Washington State transfer. Mateer highlighted Oklahoma's portal plunder that transformed its roster after a losing season. Alabama, too, could present a more compelling playoff case if it finishes at 9-3 this season, compared with its 3-loss resume from 2024. The Crimson Tide will play 10 Power 4 opponents after facing 9 last year. 2 of Alabama's 3 losses last season came against teams that finished the regular season 6-6. Ole Miss, like Alabama, secured a marquee victory against Georgia, but the Rebels lost at home to woebegone Kentucky. Strength of schedule influences the committee's rankings, but losses to bad or mediocre teams become an anchor on a resume. Interestingly, Oklahoma and Florida landed crippling blows to SEC's quest for 4 playoff bids last year by upsetting Alabama and Ole Miss, respectively, in late November. Let Alabama and Ole Miss be a lesson for Florida and Oklahoma. If you must lose, don't lose to the weaker teams on your schedule. Score some wins against top 25 opponents. Let your strength of schedule work for you. And don't lose to Vanderbilt or Kentucky. Oklahoma won't need to worry about that last point. Its schedule includes neither Kentucky nor Vanderbilt nor any SEC opponent that's expected to finish among the bottom 4 of the conference standings. Oklahoma's schedule amounts to the biggest challenge in all of college football, Venables said in December. That's not hyperbole. I could say the schedule staring down Florida and Oklahoma seem engineered to get a coach fired. Alternatively, they're also designed to nudge a team that finishes 9-3 into the playoff. Collier carries squad to rout of Team Clark. Nafessa Collier scored a WNBA All-Star record 36 points to help Team Collier roll to an easy 151-131 victory over Team Clark on Saturday night at Indianapolis. The Minnesota Lynx star was 13 of 16 shooting and collected 9 rebounds while claiming MVP honors. "I have amazing teammates," Collier said. "You guys see who's here. Couldn't do without them, so all the credit to them." Alicia Gray of the Atlanta Dream added 18 points, and Kelsey Plum of the Los Angeles Sparks and Nneka Ogwumike of the Seattle Storm added 16 for Team Collier, which led by as many as 27 points. Skylar Diggins of the Storm registered an all-star record 15 assists to go with 11 points and 11 rebounds for Team Collier. We came out here to have fun. We put ourselves out there, and I wanted to leave here with something, Diggins said of the first triple-double in WNBA All-Star Game history. We have such a talented group. I knew I was going to have to find my niche elsewhere, so I started racking up the assists. Kelsey Mitchell of the Indiana Fever scored 20 points for Team Clark. Kiki Irifen of Washington had 17 points, and her Mystics teammate Brittany Sykes added 16. Gabby Williams of the Storm also had 16 points, and Kayla Thornton of the Golden State Valkyries had 15 points and 11 rebounds. Caitlin Clark of the Indiana Fever sat out the game due to a right groin injury. The game featured a 4-point shot from circles located 28 or more feet from the hoop. Team Collier made 12 of 28 4-point shots, while Team Clark was just 8 of 37. Collier made 4 of 5 4-point attempts. The growing tension between the league and players hung heavy during the contest. The players wore "Pay us what you owe us" t-shirts during warm-ups and while sitting on the benches. A meeting between the two sides on Thursday led to many players being critical of the lack of progress toward a new collective bargaining agreement. When we say the W, we're at the forefront of a lot of different things. Aha Wilson, a 3-time league MVP, suited up for Team Clark, said of the shirts worn by players. There are things we deserve and we're demanding. Right now, during this transformative time that we're in, we need to start capitalizing on that. We need to get what we're well overdue for, and it shows how powerful our league is and how powerful our voices are on our platform. Mitchell said the statement on the t-shirt spoke for itself. It was important for our statement to remain clear, Mitchell said. We just want the respect we deserve at the end of the day. Team Clark trailed by 22 points at the break, but Gray hit a 4-pointer and a tray within a 37-second span to give Team Collier a 97-70 advantage with 6 minutes 25 seconds left in the third quarter. Team Clark scored the next 8 points before Collier buried a 4-pointer and Gray made a 3-pointer to give Team Collier a 104-78 lead with 4 minutes 50 seconds left. Team Collier led 119-95 entering the unsuspenseful final stanza. But with 5 minutes 30 seconds remaining, Collier buried a 4-pointer off a pass from Diggins, giving Collier the points record and Diggins the assists mark. Arike Ogunboyewale of the Dallas Wings set the points record of 34 last year. Team Collier came out fast with Paige Buchers of the Dallas Wings making a 4-pointer for the game's first points. A 4-pointer by Kayla McBride of the Minnesota Lynx made it 45-32 later in the period before Team Collier led 49-36 entering the second quarter. The margin was 9 in the second quarter before Collier scored 10 straight points. She knocked down back-to-back 4-pointers and added a layup to give her squad a 63-44 lead with 5 minutes 57 seconds left in the half. Team Collier led 82-60 at the break. Collier had 18 points on 7 of 8 shooting. And that's all I have time for. This is your reader, Robert Worm, saying thanks for listening.